Welcome to Circular Firing Squad. I'm Marty, a counseling faculty at Kent State University and host for Circular Firing Squad. We've got 5 members, 5 questions, and 5 answers for each question. Questions are generated by each squad member and run from the fervent to the feckless. Let's see who's with us in this episode.
Hi, Eric Perry, clinical faculty at Southern New Hampshire University.
Hi, Steph Martyr, doctoral candidate at Kent State University, practicing clinical counselor, and hopefully still co-host of Grad School Deconstructed.
Love the optimism, Steph. Jenn Cook, associate professor, University of Texas at San Antonio.
Hey, y'all. Mitch Conrad, graduate student at Cleveland State University.
And Stephanie's back. We finally get a Stephanie question in now. She's been under the weather with cold, flu, COVID, whatever the hell it is she's got. So she's bringing her A game tonight to the podcast. And Eric, you've got the first question.
Oh, and I'm going to start with excitement, right? Big one. So what are the best ways you know to teach statistics and psychometrics?
This is great to come back to for the very first question. Especially,
you are welcome.
Yeah.
You are welcome.
I can speak from being a student. And as a student, it was great when people are clear and they break down the steps, but they make it all go together and make sense as for how the statistics tie into the equations that you're using, when to use them. And it builds on each other when it goes in some sort of order where you build skill upon skill, getting more in depth as you continue on. Where they say, this is the equation. I had to take statistics like back where there was you weren't online except for to type in your own programs to use to get your statistical answers. So in the interior of my books, I had written every single equation that we used, like in the little blank covers. But that's because the teacher presented it very clearly and just made it easy to understand when and where I would use those equations.
Well, Steph, you put me in the Wayback Machine because I just remembered that I took statistics in college as one of my math classes, and I had a TI-83, which wasn't actually mine. I borrowed it from somebody else, and basically learned how to program a calculator when I took statistics that time. I couldn't have told you at that point in my life, like what you were actually supposed to do with any of those equations, except plug them into the TI-83. That was what I learned. But, of course, as a counselor educator, I have taught research methods, and I teach assessment as part of other courses. I've never taught the assessment course on its own, but I teach addictions, for example. So I teach about the assessments related to addictions. So my approach in both cases is always to apply it. And I always start with applying it because if students can see what the purpose of it is, then I think that they might get into the, stats a little bit more of like having an interest in being able to run the numbers. But frankly, I don't even care if they can run the numbers. I want them to be able to know what it means. So what is an ANOVA? What is a MANOVA? So on and so forth, because most of the graduates in my program, they are going to go on and be research consumers. And so I do a lot of focus around that. So when I've taught research, for example, I start off by teaching the overview of all methodologies, not just starting quant, then qual, then mixed methods like a lot of folks do, because I want them to get a sense of which types of research ask which types of questions or answer which types of questions, So thinking about kind of conceptually, where does this all fit? And I think it really starts with the kinds of things we want to find out. So that's usually my approach, is that I'm thinking about them as consumers first. So being able to look through an article and to read the methodology section and not skip it, by the way, which many, many people do. And when they see the authors conducted a MANOVA, they know the reason for that related to the research question. Then if they want to learn the math, if they want to learn how to plug crap into Excel, SPSS, R, whatever it is, be my guest. But like, I don't even run my own statistics. I have somebody who does that for me because I don't find joy in little numbers and little boxes and sticking in formulas. So I guess since that's my perspective, it gets passed on that, if you don't love plugging in the numbers, you don't have to, but I need you to know what the numbers mean and why they are there and the purpose that they're serving.
So full disclosure here, statistics was probably one of my least favorite college classes. But as soon as we got to applied statistics, I had a teacher who really got me into it. And the reason that I got so into statistics, like as soon as we got into like applied material, like like doing SPSS and research methods and not just formulas, was that we were encouraged to make projects that aligned with our interests and test all the knowledge that we gained in that class to make a research project. This was like way back in undergrad. But as soon as I had something that I could do with it that I was passionate about, that's when I felt like I was so much more motivated to learn about statistics. I just can't get there when a professor is just going over like the formulas in class for just like knowing them for sake of knowing them. It was as soon as I got that like emotional attachment to like researching a lot of things. Like I remember my undergrad, like researching a lot of things surrounding gender, and that's when I was like kind of all in on research methods and SPSS. It just took something that I really cared about, I think, for me to get interested.
I sort of fall into the same focus as Jenn does in terms of really making it applied. Those of you talking about technology like calculators, what are calculators? All of my statistics was taught on a chalkboard, not a whiteboard, a chalkboard. And we had to take fervent notes, and all of our exams were done by doing the whole equations completely out. Now, Mitch is nodding his head. It's probably not the thrilling thing in one's life to be able to see that and then have to reproduce it. But it really, I think it gets you down to the ground level of how things are figured out. And if you can figure out the logic, it helps your thinking. But in practicality, if we're teaching master students who are going to go out and be practicing counselors, they really don't need to know how to crunch the numbers. They're going to be reading information. It's going to have statistics in it. So to the degree that Jenn, has said they need to know what the statistical tests are and why they were done that way, I think is great. I would like to see them have more applied cases or problem-based learning where they're trying to figure out what would a good researcher do to apply the statistics and what models would they use to be able to do that. But there's a little book I got. I can't remember when I got it. It might have been in my undergraduate degree, and it's available online for listeners who just want to Google how to lie with statistics. I don't know if anybody in our group has seen this book. It was written in 1954, and at least the edition I pulled down, it was a PDF of it that someone had put up. Many people had put it up, actually, so I think it's beyond the copyright. It's a great little book in getting you thinking about how to evaluate things when people are using statistics. And it gets you into the thinking of, well, wait a minute, they say 50% are doing this, but what about, how did they derive that? So it really sets the mind up on how to question what people are putting out with statistical data. And it's written in a way that it's a small book, you can get through it real quickly, and it's written in an anecdotal way that makes it easy to understand the concepts they're trying to get across. So I would go for a much more practical, we've got to teach our counseling practitioners how to evaluate what they're hearing in terms of data and information out in the world, and basically to get their mind thinking about how people can distort that information with statistics.
I don't know if you all ever did this in your classes, but I would have them evaluate ads that are on TV and on the radio and have them flip it to where the data that are reported could be reported in the inverse way and what the message would be. And that's kind of what you're saying, Marty, but that's always a fun activity because students are like, oh my gosh, so if 3 out of 4 dentists recommend Crest, what's the other 25% represent? I mean, they kind of get into it and start thinking about it in a different way. So
I do the same thing, but with correlational studies, they're everywhere, right? And how often correlation implies causation in the news and popular media, and it's amazing. It's ice cream and murder. If nobody's ever heard the analogy. Ice cream rates and use goes up in the summer, and so do murder rates. Therefore, ice cream causes murder. And there's tons of examples of this. I kind of feel like it's my birthday, even though it's not my birthday. Just being able to talk about this. I was a mathlete, if anybody's not aware, right? I didn't play sports. I was into mathletics. I competed in high school in math. That was my claim to fame. It was lonely, but it was my claim anyway. I enjoy teaching it now. I enjoy talking about it. I think there's a lot of ways to get students excited about it. And I think being critical consumers of research is part of how you can do that. Once they learn, they can start to pick apart how some of these studies are done, some of the results, and that the statistics that they give and understand can help them do that, can understand, what is going to support me as I work with clients, what is going to support the work that I do or that I want to go for. They can get excited about it. I think we get too stuck in the math part sometimes and thinking about the calculations themselves and really need to stick to those meanings. And there's so many fun ways to do that that I think really engage you in the process. So I appreciate the sharing of ideas. And I know it's not the most exciting question in the world, but it's a fun one for me.
And now for another fun question. This has been on the, it's been on deck. It's been on deck for a long time now, but finally, since I'm here, I can ask, if you could use an emulator to play retro games, what game would you play?
Well, I'm going to sound a little long in the tooth as if I'm 110 years old. And I got to go with the very first game that came with my ColecoVision, which was Looping. I don't know if anybody ever played Looping, which was, this little airplane, and the controls were in reverse, just like an airplane would be. So to go up, you had to pull back and all of that. But closely after that, we also got the game Zaxxon, which was also in the arcade, which was like one of the most badass games ever, by the way. I just have to put that out there. I have to mention Donkey Kong Jr. because I played that on Atari on my 2600 adapter that plugged into my ColecoVision that one of my friends had. So we played many of hours of that. But last but not least, I must mention the Smurfs, which I'm going to tell you sounds like the stupidest game ever on ColecoVision, but it was legit the best. And when you have to fight Gargamel at the end and you keep having Gargamel kill you over and over and over again, it is reminiscent of like what we all went through playing Zelda once Nintendo came out, because there were all these tricks you had to figure out and all of this. Like it was early, but I'm back on. I had ColecoVision, so of course you're getting a like really super heavy ColecoVision answer, and I could obviously not only narrow it down to one.
I've been waiting for this question my entire life. I love emulation so much. I think the reason that I love it is because like 90% of video games are not commercially available anymore. And so the only way that you can play them is like if you like find an arcade somewhere or like one of the big game makers like wants to re-release it or something like that. I always find it really great to just hear, Jenn, you shared like some of the games that you played, right? And how much joy that those games can bring to people. And it's sad to me that they're not available anymore. I'm someone who does dabble certainly in emulation. I'm very passionate about video game history and preservation of media. That the idea that like 90% of movies would just be like gone and not exist tomorrow, or 90% of music would just be like unfathomable to me. And so it's sort of the same kind of thing here, is that like we need better ways to preserve games and be able to like share the fun memories that we had with them. I know that like I recently got a chance to play Space Invaders with my mom for the first time. It was one of like her favorite games, and we were able to like share that moment together of, I've never played Space Invaders before, but she has, and she remembers it, and she's still just as bad as it as she remembers that she was. And I'm not great at it either, but it was like a nice little like family moment that we were able to share. My sister and I still play this game called Wario's Woods, which is kind of like a random like Tetris game for Super Nintendo. And we like are very competitive about it every time that we see each other. Like some other arcade games, like I'm thinking of Galaga is like one of my favorites. Just being able to share those with like things that we grew up playing, but are no longer commercially available, we can emulate. I just think that's like so special. So really love old games.
Jenn, you brought up the one game that I really got stuck on, and it had nothing to do with little animated fantasy characters. When those things started happening, I was like, no, not for me. But Zaxxon, and you can find Zaxxon emulators now. You can find, you can go on Amazon and you can buy boxes that will play Zaxxon if you want to do Zaxxon. But for me, I've got to go in the way back machine, and this might challenge Eric's claim as a mathlete. But the Plato system, Plato, and if you search Plato computers, these were developed at University of Illinois, and I went and did my undergraduate at the University of Illinois and was tied to the Plato system. I would encourage you to look up Plato computers and go to the Wikipedia page, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. They had these big boxes that literally had lights crossing in a crisscross pattern. And the way you responded to things that were on the screen was you touched and interrupted the light sources in the screen to advance to whatever you were doing. One of my fond memories of Plato was learning German on it. So I would go over to the foreign language building at 9:00 at night and do my German lessons. And then at 10:00, it opened up the system if you knew the password, and the password was often put on a little index card up by the bulletin board behind the desk, and you could go into all sorts of games, and other people from around the United States who were on the Plato system would play those games with you. But the other extremely fond memory I have of it, this I thought was brilliant. Everybody knows Name That Tune. I can name that tune in 3 notes. I can name that tune in 4 notes. And I wish I could find the emulator of this. In organic chemistry, we had sort of a Name That Tune game on Plato that was, I can create this organic molecule in 5 steps. Oh, I can create it in 4 steps. And then it was like, okay, create that molecule. And if you were able to create the molecule with a certain percentage of yield, then you got the point. And so it was just hours of challenging people in creating different kinds of organic molecules and trying to create it in the least amount of steps with the highest amount of efficiency. So I think I've successfully challenged the mathlete here with this one. But yeah, that organic chemistry game was just ingenious, and I wish I could find an emulator of it.
I don't know. I this is a question I probably could have a whole show on, I think. So really early on, I lived in an apartment complex, condos, and across from us heard like noises at one point in the evening. and saw lights flashing. And me and a couple of my friends who were outside were kind of like looking over to the windows, trying to figure out what's going on. And, we got caught snooping. And guy comes out and was one of the original programmers for Mortal Kombat, the first release of Mortal Kombat, and had the full cabinet in his house prior to the release of the game. So it wasn't anywhere at the time. And he brought us in and let us play. And it was fantastic. It's one of those things like I'll never forget. Of course, I have my original loves, though. And I was taking some notes while we were talking. I had an emulator not too long ago that I played Paperboy on every once in a while. Love Paperboy. Missile Command, if anybody remembers that one, was a lot of fun. Contra, right? And that whole series, these are games that I would play a lot with my dad when I was younger. Wolfenstein, anyone remembers that? I played that one on an IBM computer, the very original Wolfenstein game. I liked the different stages and phases of game development. So there's times where I want to go back and play those really kind of nostalgic games like Paperboy. And then there's times I'll pick up stuff that I haven't played in a long time, or go out there and find. And it's cool to see that most of that is out there now. You can find an emulator to play most of what's available. Now, I know some of that's not, has to be semi-legally appropriated in order to play. And same as Mitch, I worry sometimes about us not having like physical access to some of this stuff, that one day we might lose it. I was looking for the original Tecmo Bowl for Thanksgiving to play with my dad, and I was going to try and find an emulator for that for him for Christmas, because that's one that holds some fond memories for me too. I just think it's a lot of fun. It's a great way for me to relax, and every now and then I'll get the itch, look up something new, and travel down memory lane.
This is really, really cool because it made me realize how much of that I've already invited in just different ways, irrespective of the answer that I have for this. So soon after Mike and I were married and needed stuff for the house, I went to Bed Bath & Beyond, but they were selling like for $30, $50. I don't know. It wasn't money I needed to spend, but it had all of the games like Beastmaster, Contra, all of them on there. The problem was I had Did I have Castlevania? I don't know. The problem was you couldn't save anything, just like you couldn't way back when. But at this time, it's more irritating now because I got used to saving things. I don't know. So it was just fun to kind of go back with that. And I thought it was kind of ironic that the system that I will now want to emulate really had some of the most horrific emulations. It emulated some popular games really horribly because I'm thinking about my Commodore 64. My parents said, "You don't need a Nintendo. You have a Commodore." Okay. I think that they were probably rightly concerned that my brain would just get very attached to a Nintendo. They saw how happy video games made me. So maybe made a right call there, but tell you playing Super Mario Brothers on the Commodore 64, I don't know. It was like the wonkiest thing ever. It was like this, it's like you get the generic, more than generic version. And it's just like, I don't know. But I played it because it's what I had. Anyways, the game I would play now, and I've actually found it, which is what made me think about this question, was a game made for the Commodore 64 called Jumpman. And it was a fantastic game. It was amazing. And I still it has hidden levels that I never got to because it would randomly load a level. And you were this little man with a pixel for a head. And this, I guess, you would jump and there were ladders, and then there were like other little pixels with no body on them that would come and shoot at you at different angles and different speeds, and there'd be different numbers of them, and it would make this sound like psh, and you'd have to jump when they're coming at you because you couldn't get knocked off the platforms you were on. And then when you fell, and you eventually did fall or get knocked off or jump into the air, and you couldn't land, it would put the little like birds tweeting over your head, and it would dee 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 dee, which was kind of freaky at the time. But there were robots on certain levels. It was madness. It was really great with all the different obstacles and puzzles that you had to figure out. Some of them were more speed and agility, and some of them you had to actually think and figure out some intricate puzzles. So I would play Jumpman if I could really find it again. I miss you, Jumpman.
I'm noticing the more people talk about these games, I'm just thinking about more and more just popping into my head as I'm sitting here. When you said Jumpman, I of course thought about Q*bert. I don't know if anybody ever played Q*bert. Anyway, and it also dawned on me that we're probably going to need a question on some episode about the Oregon Trail, because most of us in this room were tortured by the Oregon Trail, but we're like always really glad to be playing the Oregon Trail because it meant that you weren't doing work at school.
It's also the reason I think we all learned what the word dysentery meant very early on.
Yeah, no joke, right? Yeah. So my question, what do you do to avoid jet lag?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a great answer for this. I mean, I think that the one thing that I always forget to do on flights especially is stay hydrated. And like, it's even something that I forget to in my daily life. It's like making sure to be drinking enough water. But I also I guess I am in a way fortunate in that I don't I've never gotten terrible jet lag. But I do wonder what I would do differently if I had gotten it pretty bad. So I wish I had suggestions to share, but I actually think that this question may be out of my scope a little bit.
I've got a whole series of travel issues. One, I love to travel, so that is not an issue. But I got to be very careful because I'm a big guy and I hate going into plane lavatories. So the idea of hydrating a lot on a plane is not good for an old guy with a, very needy bladder. The other thing is I snore terribly without a CPAP machine. And I discovered that on a trip from France to Turkey, where I went to sleep and because I was just exhausted. And before I went to sleep, I was surrounded by people. And then when I woke up, there was nobody in the seats around me. And the attendant leaned over me and said, "Oh, you're awake." And then I realized I'd scared. So I don't sleep on planes. So that adds to the jet lag issue. And what I do and what I've done with trips is whatever time I land, that's my new time. And I do everything in my world to stay up. So if I land in Turkey and it's 10 a.m., I'm going to stay up until 10 p.m. and then crash like crazy at 10 p.m. and try to force myself into that cycle. That usually works. I'm usually switch over pretty well. But if I go to Turkey and it's 10 a.m. and they give me a 3-hour nap, I will never get over the jet lag. I will never get back on cycle when I'm there. So I always try to make that effort to wherever I go, east or west, stay up to the point that is the normal bedtime hour for folks, no matter what it takes, and then crash.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I've always found that the trip back is worse. I acclimate pretty quickly, but then coming back home is when I hit that kind of jet lag button. And it can take me days to readjust to my home time. So the first switch is okay. The second one is bad. So I generally try to have at least a day or two to recover when I come home. It's even more important, I think, than when I leave, just to be able to get back on that cycle. Like Marty, I can't sleep on a plane. I'm tall, it's uncomfortable. I'm not a svelte boy. So it's not a comfortable experience. And getting up and going to the bathroom 8 times is just not something I can do. So for me, I think the sleep is a big deal. I try and avoid anything that's going to mess with my system, just not overdoing it on the caffeine or underdoing it on the caffeine. Trying to stick to as normal a routine as I can, and adjusting, and then coming back and giving myself that extra time feels like it's really helpful. So when I come home, I follow that same kind of regular schedule, to get back on those hours, if it means staying up or even trying to go to bed earlier than I feel like I would be ready, just to avoid that couple of days it takes to get back in the rhythm.
It's been a while since I've traveled anywhere that would give me actual significant jet lag, as far as overseas. I think I was like 14 going to France. So I don't remember. I'm sure I was all excited and could do everything at all hours at that age anyway. I don't know. I remember staying up and it was like nothing. Recently went to Denver. So I don't know, 2 hours. It didn't feel like it was going to be much. And I don't really think it was, but I felt awful the whole time that I was there, even though I was getting better bit by bit. And it wasn't until I got home that Mike suggested that it was altitude sickness. And I was like, oh, yeah, that makes more sense, because I was baffled why 2 hours was throwing me off so much. And like, I couldn't compensate in a way that I could function and feel decent. So I hope to go to Japan soon. I'm really desperately trying to plan a trip, I think for spring 2025, so I can come back and report then.
Eric, I got a comment on the whole like coming back thing, because I'm thinking you're probably talking about coming back from Europe to US, like, because I know that's where you just went. And I'm gonna tell you, the problem with that flight is people are idiots and they close all the shades, turn off all the lights. I'm like, look, folks, it's daytime. Open the shades, turn your watches ahead. Guess what? It's morning in US right now. Stay the hell awake. That's why people get screwed up coming back, because people are trying to, they're keeping it dark like it's nighttime. It's not nighttime, y'all. We got to get back on daytime. I am a big believer in what Marty said about, get on the time of wherever it is you're going. I don't sleep on the plane anymore. I used to, and I discovered that I had worse jet lag when I would sleep for 4 or 5 hours on a plane that was real crap sleep than just staying awake. And so now I just stay awake. I might doze off for 20, 30 minutes here and there a couple of times, but I stay awake. I also drink a lot of water, because guess what? That helps me to stay awake, because I don't mind using the lavatory in the bathroom on the airplane, even though I'm huge too. I'm not a small person. I'm 6 feet. So some of those toilets are a little small, although they seem to be getting bigger. Like I was just on an aircraft coming back from Europe several weeks ago now, and it was like a walk-in closet. I mean, the thing was gigantic. I could stand all the way up. I could turn all the way around. So water is a big thing, staying awake. And yeah, I make it till 10 o'clock. That's always my goal, is 10 o'clock. The hardest for me is going west. When we went to Hawaii several years back, it's been a decade almost now. That was the worst of trying to stay awake for me, because I just kept saying, stay awake, stay awake. And I was with one of my friends and we just kept like, stay awake. I'm like, we got to walk back from dinner. She's like, no, I got to get in a cab. And I'm like, no, we'll fall asleep if we get in a cab, So I always change my watch the minute I get on the plane, and know that I'm not going to miss it because I changed my watch. And so I still wear a watch with hands. And so I switch it straight away when I get on the plane, and just go in for the kill and stay awake, and just keep on staying awake. And you kind of feel a little cold medicine-y kind of buzz when you get to the other side, but it burns off eventually. I think a PhD prepared all of us for that.
All right. My question is, what part of the role of the counselor is challenging to prepare students for while they're still in the classroom?
This was an interesting question. I'm glad you brought it to us. For me, it's the privacy of the work that you do. I mean, we talk about confidentiality and we talk about ethics and how you can't talk about this and you can't talk about that. But when you're out working with this as a full-time job, everybody talks about their job, but you can't. and getting used to the privacy of, spending 8 hours in a confessional with people. You can't step out and start telling tales. So getting used to the fact that you're in a vocation that is really very private and you have to keep a lot of stuff to yourselves. And then also just the idea that your outcomes with clients are generally uncertain. They're not, the story doesn't always end like a movie for your clients. Sometimes they disappear and you never hear what the outcome is. So you have to get comfortable with that. So those are my two pieces of advice. It's just the extreme privacy of this job that it's not for party conversation. And generally, if you tell people what you do, half the time they'll either try to get some free therapy off of you or disappear because they don't want you to psychoanalyze them.
Yeah, the outcomes thing was really hard for me at first. Have a couple of sessions, things going really well, things are starting to improve, or even just, connecting with a client and then they're vapor, they're gone. And it's just, well, I hope I did good. And it kind of leaves that open-ended thing that just doesn't feel great. It's not always the experience, but it happens a lot. I think the big part for me that's hard to get across, even though we do so much with it, is this idea of self-care. And we talk about it, and like I get toward the end of the teaching at the end of the program, right before field work, and students are like, I do not want to reflect on self-care again. And it's getting across what you need to be present and in that space 8 hours a day, back to back, and how strenuous it really is to be in that space for 3 or 4 hours at a time without a break. It can be tougher than you can really convey. And once you're in that situation, you start to get it and you start to see it. And then the grind moves forward and you have to prepare for what that's like for you to be in that seat. And, as much as we talk about it, as much as we walk through it, I think there's this element of you can't really understand it and how taxing it can be, and fulfilling it can be at the same time, right? Which is just these totally conflicting emotions that you have to walk with. And then learn how to deal with as you go forward. And that has to change because stuff doesn't always work the same. So, something works really great at getting you through for a while, and then stress builds up and you have to adjust, and, you have to start doing these things that you start doing with clients to be effective in this role. And I think sometimes it's hard to prepare students for that experiential part that doing the job is going to provide for them, and pushing for things like supervision in their own therapeutic work, being vital to that. And I don't think they can always see it because they haven't been presented with that challenge. And I don't think that's something we can present them with in a really genuine way through just educational means. So yeah, that's what always sticks with me.
That kind of has me thinking like how to help students really learn to do the things that they're asking of their clients or they're suggesting to clients, right? I think that's an excellent point and something really pertinent. I was thinking about this and for something that was kind of unique, and I guess what came to mind, as morbid as it might be, is losing a client if they complete suicide, or if there's some homicidal situation. By the nature of the situation, that's kind of good that we can't necessarily adequately prepare students for that. We can give them resources and, go through steps of what to do, and then go back to what Eric was suggesting with a lot of that self-care and supervision to address that. But I think just because it's an extreme situation and it's very real, but it's also something that people hope, maybe doesn't happen. It gets talked about, but I don't think that that's something you can really prepare anyone for or a student for in the classroom.
I have so many things running through my mind of like when students write you after they've been graduated, or you run into them in the street and they're like, Cook, you're not going to believe. Remember when you told me blah, 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 and I didn't believe you? We probably all have these stories, but a couple stand out. One is the importance of emotional boundaries, being able to kind of protect your emotions, keep yours to yourself, not be soaking up your client's emotions. It kind of goes a little bit with what Eric was saying related to self-care of like, you can't really know what it means until you have to live it. And it's really, it becomes active. It has to be an active process, not just simply a teach in the classroom. But the other thing that comes to mind really clearly that all the time, anytime I taught skills, and I taught skills for 9 years. I'm not teaching skills now. This is the first time in 9 years I'm not teaching skills. But the whole idea of being expert on process, not on content, that clients are the experts on the content, we're the experts on the process, but that to be expert doesn't mean that it's the same way every single time with every single client. There's not a rote path that we can designate that this is how it's going to go. If you do at least 4 reflections and summaries, then of course it's time for an open question. It's like, it's not that straightforward or easy. And the idea of embracing process over content in terms of expertise means that you're not solving anyone's problems. You're not, just tossing advice constantly. And have you tried this? And have you tried that? Which in the beginning they love to do. They love to problem solve. And even over time, they still can't stop themselves, I think, until they get maybe to internship 2, they finally get to the point where they can stop themselves from saying, have you tried, and waiting for the litany to come after that of like, what about this? What about that? And the client, no. And then you don't see the client again, So I think it's that kind of stuff that you have to experience, pulling that behavior and the client rolling their eyes or not coming back, to really kind of grasp like, yeah, that's not counseling and that doesn't work. And wow, I guess Cook was right. And every other counselor educator who's ever said it.
Yeah, thanks everybody so much for sharing your answers. I know that, as a grad student who's not in internship, but has a lot of, friends who are currently in internship, like in my program, like I'm glad to hear some similarities and kind of like in what they're experiencing. Because I think it is hard to like get a full picture of like what being a counselor is. I think like someone had a conversation with me. It was like, I think that they were saying something along the lines of like, I think that I've been doing a lot of work to like have a good session with a client, but I don't think that I was thinking very much about like how to hold a job that's 8 hours a day, seeing clients for 8 hours a day. It's like, yeah, okay. That kind of makes sense a little bit. So it's interesting. Like I think about some crisis management stuff as well. I know stuff you touched on this. Like I think that, I was in a job where I had to deal with a lot of like pertinent, like crisis management, working with the police, working with, security in places. And there was a lot of times where that was like the rougher part of the job. And like, it's hard to train people for that, as opposed to like getting out there and like experiencing it first. And so I think it's one of the reasons why I'm so like chomping at the bit to like, I just want to actually, I feel like I've been in school for about 2 years now. I'm ready to get to internship and start actually seeing clients. So excited about that. But yeah, thanks everybody for your answers. Good stuff to think about.
Well, my question tonight kind of, I think, segs off of that. It wasn't planned that way, but it is now. How do you manage it mentally when work or life gets too overwhelming?
Okay. So I have a couple strategies. Some of them good, some of them not great. Usually I start with passive aggressive. That's how I tend to interact with the world once I'm overwhelmed, overstimulated. And I start to notice it in my own behavior. It's a kind of a trigger point for me. I realize I'm probably overwhelmed. I use humor, and that helps, to sit in that kind of place. But it's the laugh or cry option, right? I've kind of hit that turning point. So those kind of tip me off that there's things that need to change. And I think there's a ton of ways I go about this depending on what that stressor is or where the tipping point is. There's been a lot of instances where I've had to really sit down and decide what needs to go, right? If I'm overwhelmed, something needs to go. And it's generally because I've gotten myself involved in too much. I have a tendency to do that. I have a tendency to say yes too often, and really need to narrow to those things I really enjoy, like to do, or that aren't additive to my stress and have benefit. So there's a lot of times where I need to start making those decisions. And once I hit that decision point, I cut stuff. Stuff's got to go. I think the other thing is really leveraging the things that I know work when I'm overwhelmed that help. I have peers for that. My spouse is a huge form of support, right? When things get overwhelming, I can mouth vomit, just like lose my mind for a few minutes without judgment. And that's a real comfort to be able to have that. And I have friends I have that with too, that I can call and just lose it, right? And then just hang up the phone and it's fine. We can have a normal conversation the next time we talk. I think just really leveraging those resources that work. We talked about games a little bit earlier. Sometimes I need to just unplug. I need to do something that has no actual consequence to anything else other than my own amusement and enjoyment. And how less frequent those things are a part of your life, I think, when you get older, can start to impact you, because you go from this real downswing on doing things that really have no impetus on the future. And you need those things, I think, as a part of your ability to cope. So, for me, it's grabbing onto those strategies, grabbing onto those resources, and sometimes cutting out those things that just aren't bringing me joy, so to speak.
You touched on, you touched on several things that have also worked for me when I start to get irritated that I have to do things that are really, if I took a step back, not necessary in any way, shape, or form, but they feel like it's life important. As far as participation, it's the commitment at times, or how much, or is it the perfectionism that's driving me crazy and it just doesn't need to be that deep? And, trying to figure out where to trim back, whether it's in my intensity or it's in the amount of obligation. You also did do a lot of the other things. I'll just be like, I'm going upstairs now, and I'll be down in 2 hours. And I watch a stupid movie or a good movie, but something, or I roll Katamari, or shoot some stuff with Fortnite or in Fortnite. Is this my age? I play the Fortnite. Is that, but trying to get lost in something else other than my thoughts for a while. Absolutely.
I've noted, this is funny, when I was thinking about this question, I'm like, I don't think I'm as chronically overwhelmed as I used to be. And I don't know if that's just sort of over time, I don't care as much, or I don't have as high of perfectionism. I don't think I say yes to as many things that I don't want to do anymore as I used to. And that, I think, has been a real relief. I mean, I still say yes to things, but I don't overload on the yeses anymore, because frankly, I like reading a book in the evening at my, and sitting on my porch and watching my neighbors and their dogs and all that. You know what I'm saying? So I want room for that. I want to cook at night, even though all of those things in themselves can be stress relievers and help me not to feel so overwhelmed. I like them to be part of my regular day on a daily basis, But it's funny, like Eric, when you were talking about like humor and sarcasm, and I mean, that's part of how I know that I'm starting to get a little bit fried. If we're all working at home still, some degree of the time, and I'll have a colleague call me about something, and they're like, "How are you?" And I just start laughing. That's when I know that, like, okay, we're starting to get up here, and then they start laughing, and there's like that kind of mutual respect for like, yeah, we're gonna laugh right now because crying is just not an option. But I also, I think you all know this about me. Like, I've always got a song running, and when things start getting up here, all of a sudden I'll hear, y'all gonna make me lose my mind up, like I'll just start singing that over and over again. So like, and it helps to kind of break like ordinary overwhelmed. Sometimes I'll have done something really hard and I'm just so sick of it, and I have one of these easy buttons from one of those office stores that
was easy.
Legitimately, I push this button to kind of like ironicize my way out of things that are hard, like, I don't know. Like, I know this all just sounds really bizarre, but like, I just have had to find ways to bounce through a crazy reality. And I think most of us live a crazy reality. So it's like, I might start singing, some really raunchy hip hop to get me out, or I might need to like go for a walk. Sometimes I just have to physically get the gross out of my body, and sometimes I just need to lie down. And I tend to let myself do that because I'm like, why not?
Yeah. I think when I was younger, I definitely relate to like the idea that, I think a few of us have mentioned the idea of like saying yes to too many things. I think that I get so interested in different projects that people are doing or different tasks or ideas that I try to latch on and get involved, whether it be at work or at school, or with friends. And I think that as I've gotten older, I've seen that like I've generally been spreading myself too thin and being a part of too many things instead of doing like a few things really well. And so like that's, I think, the adjustment that I've made probably in the last 5 years is that I feel like I'm saying no more with the idea that like I'm trying to take the roles and responsibilities that I have and like put more into the main ones that I have. And I think a lot of times I still like know that I feel bad like when I do say no to things. So for instance, like I know that I'm not someone who can like hang out with people every single weekend. I need my alone time. I need my, time where I'm just like chilling at home and listening to music, watching like, we were all saying like just watching stuff for sole purpose of enjoyment. And I think that's helped me a lot over the past like 5 years, is to really just like, I can't go, I'm not someone who can go out every weekend and hang out every weekend with people anymore. I love being around people. But the reason that I love being around people is I'm around them the right amount. And when I'm around other people too much, then I think that's when I get overwhelmed. So I think it's really for me, it's about taking more, really just taking more meaningful time for myself away from the important things that I've got to do in life.
Such deep, heady, existential answers. I was just looking for something simple. I liked Eric's comment about passive aggressive. That's sort of my signal to know that too much is getting to me. And sometimes I get hypercritical. And Aileen will say, stop misbehaving. She will point it out to me when I start complaining about get off my lawn. She'll say, chill out. But for me, and this is one of the benefits of COVID, I think, having to stay at home, and then the whole work world changed. So yeah, you can I felt more comfortable to work at home. So a greater percentage of my time is in this room, working at home. I go in for all of my classes, go in for all meetings that demand that I'm in present. But when I'm not there, and if I can schedule the rest of the block of the day away, I'm here at home and I'm working, which means I'm also about 20 feet away from a nap. So anytime it just seems like it's too much, screw it. I'm taking a 30-minute nap, and I can snore as loud as I want to because I'm not on an airplane, and come back after that, grab a cup of coffee, and I'm back at my job here at this desk at home. So I tried to keep it simple. Now, I'm surprised none of you brought up the final shot question, because that there in itself is another way to deal with life when it gets mentally too overwhelming. And the final shot question is, what do you think is the essential element of a Hallmark Christmas movie?
Aside from the mute button, because I'd rather not, I'm pretty sure it's someone is Santa Claus. Someone is secretly Santa Claus.
I thought that it was some sort of title that is a pun combining romance and the holiday terminology of some sort.
I think it's I'm so lonely of a woman, but I can't say that I'm lonely because I'm a strong working woman. But when I see that hot guy in the Santa Claus suit, I know I'm going to pretend like I don't like him, but I'm going to go for him when he comes for me because, he's going to bring all of my blues away because it's the Christmas season.
I'm going to say that the most essential element of a Hallmark Christmas movie is probably Christmas. That's the best I could.
Boy, you folks have issues. Let me tell you the most essential part of a Hallmark Christmas movie: black ice and amnesia. You've got to have an accident because of that black ice, and then you have to have amnesia. And the quintessential one is, I love this title. Remember, Steph, you talked about titles. A Christmas to Remember. That's where Mira Sorvino, Academy Award winner Mira Sorvino, her career post Harvey Weinstein, which explains why she's on Hallmark movies, hits some black ice, slides off the road, crawls back up on the road, has amnesia, and it is not an Oscar-worthy performance. It's basically her walking around like she's stoned the whole time with her eyes open and glazed. So black ice and amnesia, essential components to a good Hallmark Christmas movie. You could probably even search that movie and watch it, or Eric, in your case, you can watch it with the mute button on. It's just as funny, and actually the plot plays through without any sound. So let's give thanks to the firing squad: Eric, Jenn, Stephanie, and Mitch. Look for some of these characters on their podcasts on the Pod Talk Net. You can find out more about them at circularfiringsquad.net. Make sure and check out the Tech Savvy Professor podcast hosted by Eric and myself. Our theme music is from Menage a Quad, Real Swing Shet. That's it for this episode of Circular Firing Squad. Ready, fire, aim.